Hi, everybody. Well, today I thought I'd talk about Juneau, Alaska, and what's been happening there with the petition and now the vote going on to ban cruise ships on Saturdays as well as 4th of July, not to mention all the new restrictions that they're bringing in to limit the amount of passengers that are allowed off the ship coming up in the next few years. But the vote doesn't seem to be going the way of the ban. Now, slowly they've been starting to count the votes that have been coming in. Currently, they had voted some of the constituents and they've checked some of the votes, and they've also done all of the votes that were mailed in or dropped off early for the early voting, which it was quite significant for the size of the town of Juneau. And right now it looks like it seems to be about 60% of the people are voting no to the ban on Saturdays. They seem much more interested in voting things like repairs to the water system that's there, to changes to the port, and less concerned with the cruise ship visits to actual Juneau. Now, 40% is still pretty significant if it stays at that amount, and it could flip-flop. There are still many more votes to come in, but usually this is a pretty good sign of exactly how the vote's going to go once those preliminary mail-in votes go, as those tend to be the most dedicated people who really want their vote to count in something. Make sure I'm going away, I got to make sure I vote. You know, they have strong feelings on some of these propositions, and so they're the ones who make sure they go in. Other people are kind of like, well, okay, we're going to vote kind of thing, or we're going to be here and we're going to vote, but it's usually a pretty good determination of exactly how many, which way the vote's going to go. Now, I've been looking at both sides to this argument that's going on, and I've been listening to both sides. The sides that want Saturdays tend to be, going on the, Juneau 20 years ago, you could walk down the street and you knew everybody, and it wasn't flooded with cruise ships, and it was a much smaller, tighter community. There weren't helicopters flying over Mendenhall Glacier. Right now, whenever we walk in Mendenhall Glacier Park in the walking paths, the hiking trails and everything, and all we hear is helicopters. And I'm going, I walk those paths myself. I hike all the time when I'm in Juneau. And quite frankly, the helicopters aren't that noticeable. They're noticeable in town when they're landing and taking off, same as a seaplane is. But again, those are people's jobs as well, right? That's an actual business that's running there. I guess it's one of those cases of not in my backyard, I guess seems to be the situation. And as far as in 20 years ago, Juneau, you could walk down the street and you recognized everybody. And well, you know what? 20 years ago, half my town that I live in wasn't there. In fact, the houses I live in currently weren't there 20 years ago. A lot changes in 20 years. And just because we miss the way things used to be in smaller communities and stuff like that, when things grow and expand, I mean, the countries used to be much smaller than they are now. The population used to be much smaller than they are now. So to say that things have changed in 20 years is kind of not an argument, because everything changes over the course of time. So I'm not really buying that as an argument, but I can see the inconvenience of having a ton of people show up. Here's one of the issues, though. Those ton of people who show up help support the entire community to the tune of millions upon millions in, direct spending from cruise ships, passengers in Juneau. over $40 million just in the cruise port alone on fees, etc. And those fees are set to go up and go higher. Not to mention all the jobs that are created along the port, from people doing shore excursions, to the bus drivers, to the restaurants, to the bars, to everything, right? The whale watching companies, etc. And the argument on their side is, it sounds like, one day a week is not a big deal. But remember, it's not sailing all year round. There's a season in Alaska. They shut down, in October. That's it. It's gone until April of the following year, sometimes May. And it doesn't really start picking up until near June. So you're talking June to September, a much shorter month. Now you take one Saturday out of that, and that's a hefty hit on your income, potential income. So their argument is, well, what if somebody went up to you and said, we're going to take away 1/7 of your salary? Just like that. I don't think too many people would be very happy. I don't think too many people would be thrilled at that idea, to lose 1/7 of your income overnight. And so that's a pretty strong argument. That's a pretty strong defense, I'd say. Not to mention, a lawyer has already come out and said, by the way, there's probably going to be at least a minimum of 3 lawsuits if this passes and we try and ban cruise ships on Saturday. One is already hinted from Royal Caribbean, who will fight that, not to mention the people who own the port and the dock. Second of all, not to mention the people who run the excursions and the businesses and everything. All have already said that they would probably sue to try and defeat this in court, which would just turn around and cost more money for the city and everything. Expense just costs more animosity between people, etc. And unless there's an overwhelming majority of people, I'd say you'd have to be 60 to 70% who say, yes, we don't want cruise ships anymore. I don't see the point of trying to hurt businesses and hurt the income, and possibly even raise your own taxes, because if those taxes aren't being made by the cruise ship, those port fees, and the money's not being spent in there, and the job companies aren't making as much money, well then, guess what? The city has to make money somewhere. They have to raise your taxes. They have to charge more for things. And it's just the way of the world. But I really did look at it, and I was looking at both arguments, but some of the arguments just seem to be more of not in my backyard. And the other side of the argument is I could really take a hit on my business. I could really start hurting. Not to mention I may even have to lay people off of their jobs, because 1/7 of our income would be gone. And many people point out they're already working with the Cruise Line International Association, CLIA, and setting limits on certain days, like Saturdays will be limited to a certain amount of people. And the rest of the week also limited at a certain amount of people, and a maximum of a certain amount of ships in every day. They're already starting to work and negotiate with the cruise lines, plus put in new cruise fees to even make more income for the ships coming in. So as it stands now, it looks like that proposition will fail, and there will not be limits on Saturday and 4th of July on cruise ships. But of course, the people who said that they're putting this forward say, this is not the end of our fight. We don't only want ban on Saturdays. We want getting rid of more and more cruise ships over and over again. And when basically your entire community relies on tourism, that's a hard sell. That's definitely a hard sell.